Most people assume that plastic is an invention of the modern era, but lacquer, the first artificial plastic, was used as early as the 13th century BC. If it was pleasant to have lacquer-painted figurines and ornamental boxes around the house, it was the manipulation of another raw material that really propelled Chinese civilization out of sight from the competition. China's mastery of this product was 1,700 years ahead of anyone else on the globe and was crucial in its early development.
One of the great differences between the material culture of pre-modern China and pre-modern Europe was the fact that from about 600 BC in China, there was the ready availability of cast iron. That is, iron that comes out of the furnace in liquid form and can be run into molds. Now, this meant that in China, unlike the West, iron tools were common and cheap. Everybody could afford to use them. It makes a huge difference to the productivity of agriculture. Steel, too, could be produced in relatively large quantities in China, something which in Europe was a difficult process, something you could produce maybe just enough to make a sword from.
The Chinese were masters at manipulating their iron materials in countless different ways to obtain the exact type of metal they required.
The ready availability of metals in China was a great advantage. And of course, it did depend on things the Chinese were already good at. By the time China started casting iron in the 6th century BC, it had been casting bronze into huge, complex vessels made in complicated pottery molds for centuries before that. Those preceding skills came together to give China a great advantage in agriculture and industry from early times onwards.
In iron and steel, they led the world until modern times, and they were the first to make steel by taking the carbon out of cast iron. But then no one else could have done that at the time, because cast iron only existed in China. Few structures seem more typical of the modern world and its engineering achievements than the suspension bridge. Yet its origins are far from modern. With a succession of 8 spans stretching over 1,000 feet, this bridge at Anlin in Sichuan province is believed to have been built in the 3rd century BC, around the time Hannibal was crossing the Alps to invade Rome. But the true suspension bridge was only possible with the use of iron cables. The longest such bridge that still exists is this one at Luding, also in Sichuan province. With a single span of 361 feet, it was rebuilt in 1705, replacing an earlier bridge at the same site. The suspension cables are wrought iron chains, embedded 40 feet into the rock at either side. The first suspension bridges in Europe did not appear for another 1,800 years after they were invented in China. And now they are an essential part of the fabric that our modern world needs to maintain connectivity. Icons of 20th century progress, the American skyscraper. These buildings could not have been constructed without the use of cast iron or steel. It's no coincidence that what could be called the world's first skyscrapers were often constructed by the Chinese entirely out of cast iron. Since the discovery of cast iron and steel came from China, it's fair to say that the urban jungles of our modern world are literally built on foundations laid by the ancient Chinese, long before the birth of Christ. The mastery required to develop cast iron and steel would also be needed to produce one of China's most sophisticated exports. One that would be a mystery to the West for centuries. And the discovery of its secrets became not so much a curiosity as an obsession.
It was nearly transparent, it was entirely waterproof, it was beautifully smooth so it could take the finest decorations.
There were two miracles during ancient Chinese civilization. One of them is bronze. But the development of bronze has been a secret even until now. Meanwhile, the development of porcelain hasn't been affected at all. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the Europeans considered porcelain a treasure. They thought Chinese porcelain was a precious natural stone, not man-made, but polished and burnished. There was a Jesuit missionary called Dwarfing who lived in Jingdezhen for over 20 years to spread the gospel. He was very keen to know the secrets of porcelain.
I have interested myself in the manufacture of this beautiful porcelain, which is so highly prized and is sent to all parts of the world. It appears to me that a minute description of all that concerns this kind of work might somehow be useful in Europe.
Ordinary pottery is made from clay, baked in a kiln at temperatures ranging from 500 to 1150 degrees Celsius. Porcelain is something quite different.
Porcelain is a product of sophisticated technology. Pottery is an elementary stage. Porcelain is much more advanced. The difference is that there are no specific requirements to make pottery. It can be made in any part of the world.
Achieving its unique qualities lies in changing its chemical status by firing pure clay at much higher temperatures. This, in turn, is only made possible by the design and construction of the kilns. It was incomprehensible to foreigners that clay could be translucent, and they were therefore in awe of its mysterious qualities.
We now know that a lot of these properties are due to the fact that its microstructure is very interesting. It consists of a network of little fibers immersed in a glassy matrix that makes it, by pre-modern standards, a very high-tech product indeed. It was unlike anything that any European had seen before. You might even think of it from their point of view as a material from a different planet.
Throughout 2,000 years, in the evolution of porcelain in China, there have always been new inventions and innovations. The development of color to white porcelain is a leap forward in knowledge. It demands even more advanced technology and refined materials, and this reflects the technology of a country. White porcelain appeared in China 2,000 years earlier than Europe and Japan. Porcelain in China has never been stopped, and it has reached its highest level through the innovation of technology and science, step by step.
By the Song dynasty, around the time of the Crusades in Europe, porcelain had reached heights that some believed were never surpassed and have not been equaled since. The achieving of certain colors and effects was the result of intricate and subtle control of the firing conditions at the kilns. Finally, Chinese clay was taken back to Europe and its properties examined. At last, the goal was achieved, and one of China's greatest secrets fell after hundreds of years of sustained onslaught by Westerners, determined to discover its hidden secrets. China today is much bigger than the world Confucius knew. A huge and diverse country, geographically and culturally. It is home to over 50 ethnic groups, many of whom don't even speak standard Chinese. China's borders have changed many times throughout the centuries, and it has sometimes split apart. But amongst the governing elite, there was always the sense that a unified state was not only best, but natural. But how has China maintained this incredible record of political and cultural unity when others haven't? Perhaps one answer is geographical. Western Europe is a collection of peninsulas and islands, an area that breaks apart relatively easily and is difficult to administer from a central location. By contrast, China is a single unified landmass with extensive coastal plains, and as such, it was relatively easy for a centralized government to administer. Perhaps another factor is the high productivity of Chinese agriculture. It created a huge economic base that was stable in a way that agriculture in Europe never was. As a result, China was able to create the necessary food surpluses, and this led to a dramatic surge in invention and innovation. With its power centered firmly in the emperor, China moved down the philosophical path of social unity, built around the family. But has unity always been an advantage?
The role of political unity in human history turns out to be fascinating and complicated and paradoxical. You would think that it's a big advantage to a country to be big and unified. A unified country can bring critical military mass, bring economic power. So that's the obvious advantage of unity. It's so obvious that one might say, well, what possible disadvantage can there be to a country being unified? Paradoxically, it turns out that if you're unified and you've got one leader, and that one leader makes a bad decision, that bad decision applies to a huge area.
你是个勇者，读书人。
我不觉得我是一个勇敢的人。
可你确实是。我多希望我的朝中有人如君啊！你有勇有谋，集美德于一身。可是很可惜，我要的品德不是这些，而是忠诚。
陛下，我是一个忠诚的人。
不。 你理想的忠诚，并非我要的忠诚。
我是忠诚的。
我多希望我和你一样，也是一名普通人。可是朝野之内，疆界之外，我们还有很多的敌人。我将要造一座城墙。 拒敌人于国门之外，而这堵城墙将会成为旷世的杰作。
China flourished behind its Great Wall. Unprecedented innovation and discovery would only strengthen China's tradition of unity. But it was destined to become its greatest weakness. A lack of interest in the outside world would lead to an ignorance of progress beyond its borders. Walls might be good for protection against undesirables, but they can also hinder the flow of new ideas and influence. And it was the willingness to embrace and understand foreign ideas that would finally tip the balance of power.